who we're talking about in those situations, and what we want to accomplish, and where we can go. What kinds of suggestions people can make that will help us get to the communities that we want. So thank you all for being here. And Dr. Mary, I guess you get to start first.
Well, thank you, Deborah. And I am thrilled to see all these wonderful faces here. So the first questions, and I'll put them in chat as well after I ask them, is first question, is your team of volunteers a fair representation of the community that is being served? And what are some of the creative and respectful ways, there you go, respectful ways that you ensure that all people are welcomed? And might as well give you a third one. What is a good way to plan the approach or enhance diverse community participation? So, any of those questions, is your team of volunteers a fair representation of the community? What is some of the creative ways to ensure that all are welcome? And what is a good way to plan the approach or enhance diverse community participation? Anyone want to contribute to any of those three questions? Linda?
Yeah, one of the things that we did that I thought was pretty clever was with regards to some of the communities was to participate both in if there were parades, if there were newsletters, if there were dinners, just to volunteer to be a speaker for those kinds of events, or have a table, sponsor a table, or contributed some way to a newsletter. So depending on the communities, I think our particular community has got a good representation, our volunteers of folks, but you know, we could always improve on that. I'm not going to say it's perfect, and our state is not as deep with other sorts of folks. But yeah, just through those kinds of things, and also community grants, and just making sure that folks have an opportunity or know about the opportunities, which we've done, to see that there are ways that they can participate.
Well, thank you for that contribution. And yes, we know that some communities, just by their geographic area, are not as diverse as others, but you know, diversity is defined as you need to within your own area. So I appreciate all and any contributions that this conversation gives to us, so that we know that there is at least an effort being made. So anyone else? I'm on my little computer today, so I have to squint to be able to see the boxes. Antoine says, no light warm-up questions. No, we just kind of went right to it, Antoine. Do you want to contribute a light warm-up question to get everybody's juices flowing? We were talking about the weather.
We can't hear you, Antoine. Okay.
Mary, while we're waiting on him to come in, this is Joyce in Virginia.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm looking across the screen and I'm seeing a number of fellow Virginians on here, and I hope they will confirm what I'm about to say. But I think in Virginia, our volunteer teams are just about the epitome of reflections of the various communities. For example, here in Southwest Virginia, we don't have as many Hispanics or Asians as we do in Northern Virginia, and consequently on our volunteer team in Southwest Virginia, we don't have that representation. But in Northern Virginia, where Martin is, there is, that's around DC, of course, which is sort of like a mini microcosm of cultures of the world. And the Northern Virginia team has an appropriate reflection of that diversity. So I'm really proud of what I see here in Virginia when I go around to various parts of the state. And I will say one more thing that I learned years ago when I was working for a school system. My Roanoke County was predominantly white, with a small minority of African Americans and others. And when we wanted to recruit more minorities to our area, we learned pretty quickly that we have to send minorities out to the historically Black colleges or the other communities that we were seeking help from, because if and I hope I'm not being overly inarticulate here, but if the only people that showed up at a Black college were white people saying, "Come teach with us," that didn't send a very clear message that there were already some here. And so in volunteering and recruiting volunteers, one of the best ways to do it is to have the diverse groups that we have among our volunteers go out and say, "Hey, come work with us. We are devoted to DEI."
And you stated that perfectly, Joyce. Thank you so much. And because I'm always lurking on the all over the Virginia volunteer page, because someone made me an honorary member of the Virginia volunteer page long time ago. Thank you very much. And I won't mention her name, but she knows who she is. So I'm always all over that. And I do see that the diversity is quite prevalent, and you all do some wonderful things and have a lot of fun too. And I know it's fun with purpose, like we all do. So thank you, Joyce, for sharing that. Anyone else?
I think can you hear me now?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, all right. So I'll try to make this short, because like these questions are making my head hurt a little bit, because I gotta really think hard about it. But what I was gonna say was, depending on who you talk to as far as the representation, it probably is gonna change in terms of the answer. I know for like here in California, if you speak to different volunteers, you may get a different answer about the representation. Some folks may feel like, oh, it's decent. Other people, let's say from the AAB community, where there are not a lot of volunteers in the Sacramento area, may feel like we need more volunteers. If you talk to one of our Hispanic Latino lead volunteers, so depending on what community you may speak to, there may be a different answer. And then if you talk to staff, there'll be a different answer, because we're thinking too about, if we bring in folks, we got to have stuff for them to do that's relevant, that makes sense, where they can represent the community and their community. And so I think it's that's why I said it's you kind of you didn't give us a softball pitch on that one, Dr. Mary. That was a curve with a lot of movement. So that's the only thing I would say. I think here in California, if you look at our numbers overall, we probably could, we could increase the number of Hispanic Latino volunteers given the population in California. Our numbers are for that specific community are pretty low. So depending on what angle you're looking at it, it could be definitely a different answer. But we try to be, as the person before me said, try to be really intentional in reaching out to recruit volunteers. And beyond like having a person go out to represent the community when we're doing recruitment, even images are a big difference when it comes to sending out an e-blast to a multicultural community when you don't have representation in the e-blast images, or even language for that matter. Having things in language for those communities that have that language difference. So it's so many different things, and can of worms, you already opened it. So yeah,
Well,
that's all.
sometimes, Antoine, if you give people too much notice of what you're getting ready to talk about, the cameras will go off and they might even just leave the room. I'm guilty of that. So,
Me too.
so we just wanted to kind of jump in both feet, because we knew within this group there were some wonderful examples, and the rest of us are here to learn because we're always striving. Kathy, I did see your hand up. You put it down, and now I see Lisa. So if you want to say something to Kathy, or no? Okay, Lisa Anderson from Idaho, and then Ernestine.
So I saw that Kathy had posed a question about the community challenge grants, and I'm saying this with a caveat that I'm on my second month with AARP. But prior to that, I worked for the Alzheimer's Association. But so with the challenge grants, one of the awardees that we had in the state was from Lapwai, Idaho, which is where the Nez Perce tribe is headquartered. And while we were up there, we went up to see what they had done to the library with the challenge grant money. I was able to talk to the librarian, who's a member of the tribe, and talk to her about getting tribal members involved in AARP and in our advocacy efforts. And from that, I've gotten so far 4 new advocates. But getting into our tribes in Idaho is difficult. When I was working for the association, and here I'll be running legislation here too, but when I was working for the association, I had one bill that I was running, and I folded the tribes into the group that I had gotten together to put this bill together. And they had told me that was the first time they'd ever been invited to put some input into a bill. And so I think I can see, just coming in new, that the challenge grants will be amazing to get the word out and get people involved, especially in those small rural communities, which you can imagine Idaho has many. With we have a vast state, and we have 1.8 million people in our whole state. So that's all I was going to say.
Well, thank you so much. And I think you said a wonderful mouthful, and within that mouthful, you said invited, because some communities need an invitation. We know that people, we know that we want anybody to come because we put words and challenge grants out there for people to respond to. But in some communities, an invitation makes them feel more welcome. So thank you for just sharing that. That's so important. Lisa. Oh, Lisa, put your hand down, or I can put it down. Ernestine, you're next.
Hi, I was simply going to say, I'm kind of with Antoine. I think that diversity is greater than race and ethnicity. And my concern is that we don't reach enough people in the rural areas, people who are very low income, people with professional experience that will help us with the presentations and exposure of the information. And my comment has to do with it was one way before the pandemic, and it is another way now. So I think we're moving away from the kind of open the door and encourage people in. At least that's what I'm feeling.
Thank you so much, Ernestine. And yes, we have to respond to our own individual environments, and some of them will require more intentional outreach, where some communities have people knocking our doors down, perhaps either from the work that's been done in the past, or that's just the nature of the community. So I think that's one of the reasons that I never want to be the person who defines what a multicultural or diverse population is, because I know it's so situational and so different, for each community. So thank you for highlighting those particular areas, the rural, low income, and the professional experience, because we need that and more. So thank you. Lillian.
Yes, I was thinking about the diversity piece, and there are small pieces or small stepping points when you come to this. But I agree with what Ernestine was saying, because North Carolina has 5 regions. And in my region, the Triangle region, we are still working to get more of our rural communities involved. But something as small as, and it's not that small, but Movies for Grownups, as a co-lead for that, I try to make sure, based on our population, that I have a variety of backgrounds and individuals working in that area or volunteering. I think as lead volunteers, we have the responsibility of making sure that we have a diverse group when we ask them to serve in a specific capacity. So I do that in my mind. I look at my list and I say, okay, well, I want to make sure that diversity is there, so that when we're in the public, they can see a variety of people and not just the same people all the time. And it's going to be interesting, because for the first time for my Movies for Grownups at the end of this month, I will have, and it's funny for me to say this because I am African-American, but I'll have an all African-American volunteer group. So it's going to be interesting to see. In me, I'm curious to see if anybody will say, where are your other populations? But it just had happened that way. But I do think lead volunteers need to be very mindful of the area of diversity and making sure that the populations and the backgrounds are represented when we're having our responsibility in manning a particular activity.
Thank you, Lillian. Before we get to Harriet and Valley, I just want to ask, because I meant to ask this last time, if I could just see a show of hands of the staff, either electronic show of hands or virtual, just to see how many staff are here. Because I think sometimes we don't realize that this is a mixed group. This is volunteers and staff, and we welcome everybody. Oh, look at the staff, look at you, yay. So volunteers, look at all these staff ears that are listening in, because this is our opportunity to share with them some of the things that can be helpful to them in their roles. And this is very meaningful to have this amount of staff represented. So thank you, staff, for taking the time and knowing the importance of this conversation. And volunteers, just look at these hands that are up and see these staff partners that we have here supporting the work that we do. So thank you all. Now, let me get back to Harriet's question and then Valley's question. Harriet, take it away.
Well, I don't have a question. I just want to say that I represent North Carolina Triad region, and we have a variety of volunteers here in our region, and they find out about the various activities that take place. We send out, one of our volunteers create a volunteer event list, and she sends this information out on a weekly basis. And it has all of the activities, it has the registration links and the contact, who's the lead for that. So we have a variety of individuals that participate in these. And again, they are of all genders, ethnicities, and what have you. And I think that we do a very good job of, by all means, making sure that our volunteers know when, where, and how to become involved. I think that one of the things that I think that came to mind, and I know someone mentioned it before, was maybe preparing some information in Spanish so that some of our individuals that are of the Hispanic population can have the information available to them. But again, I think that we do a very good job in our region.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And
Mhm.
Antoine, I see your response to question number 3, which question number 3 is, what is a good way to plan the approach or enhance diverse populations participation? And Antoine in the chat wrote, for a staff person asking volunteers about engagement, participation, etc., is a way to potentially increase participation. For volunteers, having a proactive, being proactive and suggesting events that reach deep into the multicultural communities bring another level of engagement. So thank you so much for adding that to the chat, Antoine. Valley?
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. First off, I'm here with a number of my volunteer colleagues from Maryland, and I am so proud to announce that, of the people that are on this call, they really represent the diversity of the state, in that there are a number of folks that are lead volunteers within the various counties, and they do a number of things in a multicultural perspective that not only leads efforts in their counties, but also pulling together folks from different perspectives. Like someone said a little bit earlier, the question of diversity is beyond just race and ethnicity. It's the demographics, it's the income, situation, rural versus urban. There's so many different dynamics. So I have a shout out to a lot of folks on this call who are doing that work in Maryland, and they are terrific people. But the thing about this conversation for me is really poignant in the sense that I retired a year ago from the federal government, and one of the things when this current administration came in, it was all about diversity and equity. And there was an executive order that was put forth that kind of defined what equity meant in terms of all of the populations that should be impacted, by federal government programs. But one of the things that we also talked about was this issue of cultural competency. And my question, when I kind of made the transition from, the federal government now into working in this volunteer capacity, is there an effort, that might look at the question of cultural competency in terms of building multicultural teams or a cadre of multicultural teams that kind of speak to teaching different people about different communities, and whether I've seen the diversity and equity training on the portal. I've taken the classes and things of that sort, but kind of a mobilizing force to actually get to this question of multiculturalism. We've talked about it a little bit in the Maryland office, maybe developing a cadre that does something specifically in that sense that then encourages more collaborative efforts. But, do other offices do anything like that in that regard in terms of, having something specifically speaking to really looking at pulling together some multicultural training and activities around this issue? Because I suspect, we have our stovepiped, conversations that we have within the communities that we are certainly comfortable with, but we also need to learn, about what some of the cultural aspects are of various communities. And so I just wanted to throw that question out there to see if that was something that might be of interest to other folks.
Deborah, anybody want to speak to that?
Well, actually, thank you, Valley, and really appreciated if anyone would like to speak about what they're doing in their offices in answer to Valley's question. I think that would be really worthwhile. We could provide some help. And I see Andrea Bosarth has already put something in the chat about Kansas. And so, Miss Andrea, would you like to come on and talk about what you're doing?
Hi, everybody. I'm Andy Bozarth, and I'm with the Kansas office. I'm the Associate State Director for Outreach and Advocacy. And in Kansas, we started the first diversity council that AARP has, and it's still going strong. We have about 15 people on the council representing anything from urban to religious diversity to ethnicity, rural, veterans, different things that come into the diversity language. And we have competency trainings every month for the Diversity Council members. And those members then, for example, this year we're focusing on religion, and we've had diversity trainings on, we've done the Baptist Church, we've done the Catholic Church, we've done Hinduism, the Jewish Church. We're trying to bring in as many people as possible to talk about religion, and so that our Diversity Council members can feel comfortable going out into the community and working with anybody who is different than them or anybody who's similar to them. And then they also, the Diversity Council talks about our issues to groups of people who are similar to them. So we have rural representatives who talk in rural communities. We have African American representatives that talk in African American communities, and Hispanic representation on that talk in Hispanic communities. And so it's been a very effective way to reach out and increase the diversity within our volunteer cadre, and to get AARP messages out to all different kinds of communities.
Thank you very much, Andy, for those comments. I think that was very helpful. I was looking for Tennessee because I saw Dennis was on here, and I know that Tennessee has had a diversity council or group for a little bit too, and I wondered if he might want to talk about that. But I don't see him right now, so he may have moved on. Okay, anyone else want to share? What types of, our next question was something about what types of community partnerships have been established, so is that a way to get out, to increase the numbers of people who come forward in volunteer events? Has anyone established partnerships this year with different groups?
And I know Joyce kind of talked a little bit about, the different representations. And I know that within this group, there's strong partnerships with faith-based organizations, sororities, fraternities, any civic organizations. Can anybody speak to any successes that they've had in those instances? Dale Marshall?
Yes, hi. I have a very good, strong connection. I'm from Maryland, and I have the Tri-County, the Southern counties of Maryland, but I have a very good partnership with each 3 counties that I represent their senior citizens, and they always let me know when their health and wellness fairs come up, especially with mental illness in the senior communities. So I just, this week when I had my team meeting with my manager, state employee, I have 3 fairs that's coming up. So I have good partnership within my senior citizens, senior community centers and active. And they definitely got a lot of health fairs coming up, from men's health fair to ladies to mental health with brain health. So I feel that that's a positive. So they know when I come through or stop by, they say, oh, Miss Dale, AARP, can they cover a table? We having a health fair again in October. We having a mental health fair in September. So I think that is a good thing, that I'm one of the boots on the ground for you guys, for the organization of AARP, but just to know that I'm concerned, they know they can reach out to me anytime in the community, but definitely for the senior citizen and activity centers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Dale. We really appreciate those comments. I want you to, we've talked a lot about, or heard a lot about, getting the word out, the training that's going on, the help that's going on in some of the offices. How are you getting the word out to the community or finding out from the community what it is they want? Well, how are you doing that? Is that a concern for anyone? And if it's not a concern, should it be? You know, because I know Antoine mentioned about everyone has lots of different approaches and thoughts about things, but is there some value or in some way that people want to suggest how to get that information from a community, how to find out that you're doing what it is they need to be supportive? Antoine's just looking at me, shaking his head. So,
and Deborah, if I can just point to the chat, Iris asked, is the Diversity Council different from the Multicultural Volunteer Team and or expansion of this group? If anybody wants to respond to that. And I think because multicultural and diversity are used interchangeably, they mean different things to different groups, right, that might be a way to kind of think about that, because I can't define what diversity means for anyone else other than our specific team. But if anybody wants to speak to that, and then there were a couple of other musings that Cheryl had.
right.
If you want to.
Yeah, Cheryl, would you like to just go on and rather than I read what you said, just.
Well, the question is, how do we prepare ourselves to really know the other people? I only hear good intentions and important outreach, but we can, if we don't know the community, what's right for them, what's appropriate for them, what they care about, and even the language that we use towards them, who they are, we can actually, I think, fall into a bit of a mud hole rather than promoting our desired outcomes. That makes sense?
Yes,
For example, how does, yeah, I'll just leave it there. I think that, if you listen, as we talk, I think we hear some discomfort sometimes with language. And I think that's a beginning place.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Cheryl. Put you on the spot there. Iris has her hand up. Iris?
So good afternoon to everyone representing Southeastern Virginia. Hello, Joyce. So I am what's known as a community resource consultant. So I serve on a lot of committees that represent older adults, do a lot of programming in our communities, working with our older adults and our caregivers as well. And so that is one of the things that I'm constantly harping on, if you will, is that it's very hard. And I love that phrase, fall into the mud hole, because that is what happens more often than not. How can you effectively serve individuals or groups if you don't know what they need? So if you're always giving them the same programs over and over again, and then you wonder why people say, I didn't know, I didn't know, I didn't know. Well, they don't know because you're not asking them, what do you need to know? What do you want to know? What would be beneficial to you? Rather than just going out there blanketing the community with the same thing over and over again in every corner of your community. So we have 7 cities basically represented in our areas, and each one of those 7 cities has a task force on aging, a mayor's commission on aging, or some type of organization that represents our older adults and their families. Most of the time, all of the programming looks the same. Everybody comes in, they throw up a table, they put some brochures out, they have people standing behind those tables who are supposed to be sharing information. It always looks the same. It always turns into an adult trick or treat event. We need to ask our people, what do you need and what do you want? And then try to serve them and provide the information in that way. Thanks for allowing me to share.
Well, thank you, Iris, for giving us a different approach to the thinking we're brought here. Now, Cheryl, you had your hand up a couple of times, and I know you want to go here. Say something.
Well, I've been debating this, but I will add, if you don't mind,
No,
so that I'm
come on.
clear. So I absolutely agree with what the last speaker, whose name I'm sorry I didn't catch, but I absolutely agree that we need to know what people need, what they want, who they want, how they want to be engaged. But even in approaching people, how do they want to be called? How do you address the LGBTQ community? What are the right words? And what are the interests? But just starting with the language. If you spoke to a group of Muslims or a group of Jews or people who belong to the Baha'i community, we wouldn't talk about church. As soon as you use that word, we have said to them, "Oh, you're not knowing us." And we say it with all best feelings, but it can be problematic to not be aware of the language and the needs and the interests of the group. I'm sorry, it's a bit of a lecture, but that's what I meant when I spoke earlier.
No, but thank you very much, Cheryl, for reminding us that words do matter in a whole bunch of different ways. And it is something that I think that people are becoming very conscious about. And we're wanting to do the right thing to be of service to our community. So all of you who are here that are trying to figure out what to do, congratulations, and I applaud every one of you. So Joyce, you've got your hand up. Antoine is next.
I do. I probably should have started off by saying that I, like others of you, I'm very proud of where Virginia is, but we too still have a lot of work to do. But as Iris was talking and then Cheryl just now, it reminded me that, and I was an educator in my previous life, and I taught geography. And we had a resource that was entitled "How to Avoid Getting Your Nose Punched." And it kind of it was just an article about how when you visit other countries, you should know enough about their custom and their culture so as not to offend and do something wrong or say something wrong. And it had examples of how you should not behave in place X or B or C. I know A comes before B and C and not X, but be that as it may. But what I'm thinking is, and I know rural people are not a monolith. I know that LGBTQ are not a monolith. I know that Hispanics are not a monolith, but there may be some commonalities among these groups that we should be aware of so that when we reach out to them, we don't get our nose punched, or worse than that, just avoidance. And so I remember my first year as state president. I try to go to everything I can, and that's why you all know my name, or many of you do. So I'm not sure where I heard this, but they were talking about trying to the difficulties with recruiting Hispanics. And someone in that meeting said, and I have no confirmation. I didn't do a fact check, but someone in that meeting said that it was difficult to get Hispanics to volunteer because in their culture, it was they work hard, and when they work hard, they want to get paid for their work, and that volunteering was not a part of their culture. And I'm not saying that because it was true, but if that is if that happens to be true, then we ought to know that, so that when we do seek how we can help Hispanics, we don't jump in with, hey, you ought to volunteer with us. We ought to jump in with the how can we help you, which is what Cheryl has been saying, and I love that, and what Iris has been saying. And then from there, show what we can offer, and then maybe from there get people who say, hey, this is a okay group, they're meeting our needs, maybe I should help them out a little bit. So I don't know if any of that made sense, but I'm going to mute myself now.
But thank you very much, Joyce, for bringing that up and bringing it together. So Antoine, you have the floor now.
I think, and I know we've been talking a lot about multicultural volunteers and in that space, but it's all about participation. Right. One thing we know about our country is that it's diverse. You know, right. I think it was Joyce before me, within communities, there's diaspora all over the place, right? So there's not just, I'm Black, but within my community and my experience, I have different experiences. So when my wife and I went to South Africa in 2012, we had to go through cultural competency training, because there's some different norms and things that happen all over the place. So I think even though we're talking about multiculturalism, it really is talking about engagement and how do we authentically participate in communities. And I think that's the key. It's like authenticity, right? And who do we talk to? Who's representing the community? Communities have gatekeepers and trusted sources. Sometimes we're not the trusted source yet. Right. And we deal with that a lot in California, where we link up with a partner organization that is a trusted brand or a trusted voice in the community. And so we link arms with them and talk to them about what the community needs, because we don't always know. And that's I've been in AARP for 18 years, and that's one of the things I learned when I first got here is we kind of had that understanding that we did know everything. And we would go into communities and do stuff and leave. And then when we try to go back in there, we're wondering, why don't anybody want to talk with us? Well, because you came in and left and didn't stay. And that's not authentic. And people see that and they remember. So it's things like listening sessions, going to meetings to listen and not just, talk, and being at events where, we may have a table at an event for the very first time, but it's a learning, or even just going to the event without having a table to be able to understand and see what's going on and learn who to talk to and who not to talk to. But it really does come down to something someone mentioned earlier, to cultural competency. It allows you to be comfortable in not knowing what you don't know, especially when it comes to multicultural communities, because getting punched in the nose has happened to me a few times, where I didn't, food was being offered somewhere, and I'm very particular and picky about what I eat, and people got offended. Yeah, I had no idea. But I was invited to come back. So I was able to make, so it's the competency part and the authenticity part and the trusted resource part is all a part of this whole competency conversation, because it helps us be authentic when we do go into communities. And when we're really authentic, it shows up. And then we wonder why so-and-so called me. I'd never known them. I didn't know who they were, but they called and they reached out because someone else that's probably a gatekeeper that you cultivated a relationship with, made that connection for you. And it takes time oftentimes. I think one of the things, sometimes we can get stuck in is, oh, we got to hurry up and have this event. Why can't we do these types of events? Or, why aren't our numbers looking the way they should? And that's because, especially in multicultural communities, it takes time. It's not going to happen tomorrow. And but sometimes we as an organization, we do get caught up in numbers and it needs to happen tomorrow and all of that. We're better at it now than we used to be, but it's still a piece of our culture, you know. So I think for me, cultural competency is the cog that gets everything moving in the right direction. So yeah, that's
all right. Well, thank you, Antoine, for that. And we'll close with Erin. I believe you want to have just a few words. I know you've been busy.
Thank you. I was just, thanks for the conversation today. And one thing it made me think about is a conversation I've appreciated in Minnesota is thinking about how there is a trend of people identifying less with volunteering for an organization or an institution and a shift toward like kind of hyper local and how people can make an impact in their community. So that's one of the things we've been exploring with our volunteer recruitment is rather than how can you volunteer for AARP is like, how can AARP help you make the difference you want to make in your community? Like, and I've heard a lot about listening in our conversation today. So as we work with our current and new volunteers, listening to the change that they are most interested in making in their community and thinking about like, okay, what are the resources that I can help bring to help you, and letting our volunteers and community members that we've connected with take the lead, but figure out what resources we can bring to help that effort.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Erin. I think that was very helpful. And really, it's a good way for us to wrap up because we come to these meetings, and I know at least the reason I do, is to make sure that we are listening and that we try to figure out what is it that people need. And you know, what makes your jobs easier, and that's from a volunteer perspective as well as staff, and then serves the community. So thank you all for all of your comments. They've been just wonderful. You know, we will be putting out the tape as usual so that you can have all of these things to reference. Our next meeting is August 13th. The topic then, surprisingly, is 2025 is coming. How do we ensure volunteer involvement in planning? And I think we started with a bit of that today with the young lady talking about the Nez Perce tribe in Idaho, where they were being able to be involved in planning. So let's, you know, that's our topic for August. Thank you all very much. We want to let you go now. Enjoy, stay safe.
Thank you all for the engaging conversation, as always. Come back next month.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Stay cool, stay dry, and stay happy.
There you go. That's a good one. Before we lose it. Oh, let me stop here. Stop.